Okay, we're going to get rolling here. Welcome everyone to season 3 of the Covers & Co webinars. How time flies. So really, when we're talking about cover crops, what are we talking about? What makes up a plant? So 96% of a plant is not made up of nitrogen, not made up of phosphorus, not made up of potassium. 96% of a plant is made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Now, what are those? Sunlight and water. So what's the difference? The sunlight, the water, we can access for free with good management practices and plant diversity that we're going to talk about tonight. The other 4% has turned into a billion-dollar fertilizer industry, which has been the main focus of ag production over the last 70 years. And this is what it has got us. So if you're familiar with our presentations or our webinars, we like to show this a lot, because really what we're talking about with cover crops is a systems change. Well, why do we need a systems change? Because over the last 70 years, this graph is the Canadian Stats Canada data for farm profitability. The blue lines in the graph are gross farm production. So we've held up our end of the bargain, producing as much as we can year after year after year. The green line being net farm income. So it seems as though the more inputs that we're putting in, the actual less return we get, the riskier farming becomes, and at a detriment to our most precious resource of all, which of course is our soil. So what I ask is, why don't we focus on the 96% more, capturing more sunlight more efficiently and capturing more water more often throughout the year? And what we find with cover crops is, if we look after the 96% with good, solid plant diversity, the 4% seems to take care of itself. So talking about Mother Nature's blueprint versus a monocrop blueprint. So on the left, of course, is a monocrop. Each one of those plants is capturing sunlight, releasing it to the soil, and stimulating the exact same soil biology that's responsible for accessing the exact same minerals. So all of those plants are at the same stage of their life. They capture minerals, they access the same minerals at the same time throughout the year. Now, Mother Nature's blueprint, just to the right of that, captures sunlight high, captures sunlight lower. There's high carbon plants, there's lower carbon plants, cereals, legumes, brassicas, all rooting at different depths, accessing minerals from lower in the soil profile, but also maximizing photosynthesis capture by capturing sunlight and releasing 40% of that, 40 to 50% of that sunlight via root exudates when they're in vegetation. So when a plant's not in vegetation, it is flowering and producing seeds. So as soon as a plant triggers reproduction, it stops releasing root exudates. Well, if we stop producing root exudates, we have nothing left feeding the soil biology. So here's a real world example of Mother Nature's blueprint. Yes, of course, we have flowering plants that are no longer forming a relationship with the soil biology, but we also have plants that are still either vegetative or indeterminate, capture sunlight, release it to the soil biology, stimulating that diverse soil biology that now can go into the soil and access the minerals we need to grow that plant. And that has been Mother Nature's blueprint for growing plants for 400 million years. So tonight, the crop we're going to talk about is a full season cover crop, or our full season cover crop. So we really try and hammer home on diversity. Plant diversity is Mother Nature's insurance policy to weather and climate stress, but also with achieving good plant diversity, we can capture sunlight, we can stimulate diverse soil biology, and really access those minerals that are available in the soil, but lacking the diversity to break them down and make them plant available. So here's a good example, before and after full season cover crop. You can see on the left, that's the byproduct of 100 years of tillage and nitrogen fertilizer. We have compaction. The biology is the same as human beings. They need air, water, shelter, and food. With good plant diversity and stable soil aggregates, the biology forms balls in the soil, creating pore space so water can infiltrate, air can infiltrate, nitrogen can infiltrate. But most importantly, the biology can maneuver. They create surface space to actually go and access the minerals that are living in the soil, which are plentiful. So this is a study from General Mills funded. A couple friends of mine actually did the soil tests. So 49 farms across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and North Dakota at 1 or 12 inches soil probes. The amount of nutrients that were available in the soil were plentiful. 2,300 pounds of phosphorus, 11,000 pounds of potassium, 2,000 pounds of sulfur, and the list goes on and on. So really the minerals that we need are there. It's that we don't have the biology or the diversity of biology creating stable soil aggregates to actually go and access those minerals to feed the plant. So my last slide is kind of a neat one. So we set up a time-lapse camera of a full season cover crop throughout the summer. So if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, that's the date. So this video started just a few miles from my place at the start of July. So some context, we had a very wet spring. You can see the plants that are growing there are mostly cool season cereals, of course, cool season legumes too. You see the purple flowers, flax coming in. What's so special about plant diversity is that as the season rolls on, you can see as we get into the end of July and early August, that the canopy actually starts shifting in color, becoming lighter green. And that is the C4 grasses, the warm season plants that are starting to fill up the canopy, take advantages of those conditions where they can access sunlight more efficiently and feed the soil biology that's then, of course, feeding the crop. So that finalizes my little spiel on concept of plant diversity. Hopefully I didn't bore too many people, and we've still got people on. Yes, we've still got lots of people on, so that's great. We are super fortunate tonight to have 3 young farms from across Western Canada. So we've got Curtis Lappage from Fisher Brants, Chance Rothwell from Shellbrook, Saskatchewan, and Brodie Mounkes from Rimbey, Alberta. Now, to be perfectly honest, we've had a little bit of issues with presenters today. So we were originally supposed to have Rick Kudris from Alberta. Sadly, he came down with a violent stomach flu. Brodie was kind enough to step in last minute, and we got his presentation ready to go. And I just got a text from him about 30 minutes ago saying a generator went down at work and he's going to do his best to get back here in time. So hopefully Brodie can get back. We've got him scheduled last. So hopefully Brodie can get back, but at the very least, step in for question times. I know there's people from Alberta on the webinar tonight, so it'd be really great to have a chance to ask him questions. But yeah, and again, questions go in the Q&A. If you think of something, please put it in there. We can, I'll write them down. I've got some pre-made questions as well here. But without further ado, we'll get into the presenters. So our first presenter is Chance Rothwell from Shellbrook, Saskatchewan. Chance is a friend of mine. I was fortunate enough to tour his farm this summer, a beautiful place. My wife would be jealous with the amount of animals they've got kicking around there. So Chance, if you want to unmute yourself and turn your video on, tell us about your farm. If I'm a little slow on the clicker, just say next slide, Joe, but I'll try and keep up with you and ask you questions along the way. So how about her, man?
All right, well, good evening, everyone. As Joe said, I'm Chance Rothwell, and we farm, we have a small mixed farm just west of Shellbrook, Saskatchewan. My wife and I run, and as well, I work full-time farming off the farm as well. We run about 60 head of commercial speckled park and purebred Black Angus cattle, and it seems to take up most of our spare time anyways, what little there is. Little bit of grain farming and primarily producing feed for the cattle. And that's predominantly what drew us to the cover crop business. Basically was
Chance, I'm going to stop you right there. If anyone's interested in Chance sells purebred speckled parks, so if anyone's interested in reaching out to him, just put your name in the Q&A and we'll put you guys in touch. But sorry, Chance, didn't mean to interrupt. Got to get a sales pitch in there, man.
Thank you. What I guess one of the biggest things that brought us to the cover crops was we were looking to the land we farm is quite light and nutrient depleted basically, and we were looking for a way to improve our land and reduce our input costs at the same time. and still maintain good yielding feed and good quality feed. And we kind of stumbled across this at the end of the day, and our findings through this year were very positive. We had a pretty good crop year here where we are, and it just, everything kind of lined up nicely, but the crops went over and above our expectations, our initial expectations.
So Chance, just take a second, just for the people that maybe don't know where Shellbrook is, just kind of what you normally get for precipitation, I guess the kind of land, frost-free days, just to give people some context of your area.
Yeah, we're north central Saskatchewan. We're west of Prince Albert, and we have typically a little shorter growing season. From kind of the end of the first week of May to growing season here. Fortunately, we had a nice open fall this year, and we were able to squeak off a few extra days in the fall time. About that 7 to 9 inches of precipitation is fairly average for us, maybe even a little above average. But the land can vary. It varies quite quickly in our area. It can go from very sandy to some of the best farmland in the area, right? So there's a lot of variation there, and we do get a lot of precipitation variation following along the rivers and stuff. Like where I am, a lot of times we'll miss the rains, and if you go 3 miles to the north, they'll have got an inch. So there's quite a bit of variety there as far as weather and land types.
Cool. Well, let's get in talking a little bit of production. Again, I just want to be clear with everyone, all the pictures you're seeing tonight are identical full season cover blend. And kind of what we're touching on tonight is the variation between climate, soil types, precipitation, heat units, how the crop can look different. And really what we're asking from these guys is, all of them are a year or two into their cover crop journey, is like seeing the observations that they saw. There's 3 very curious guys. So yeah, just we got them to get some pictures of different land types, different precipitation, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about here, Chance. Like what's going on the left. So May 28th, and kind of what was your observation versus the later seeded stuff in your area?
Yeah. So what we found this year was the earlier seeded stuff in May, and even into the start of June. We found that the legumes, especially the forage peas and the hairy vetch and your cereals, were a lot more prevalent out there, and we didn't see a lot for C4 plants, especially the sorghum. You could count the plants in the field in the earlier stuff, basically, of the sorghum. And once we moved forward into mid-June and on, this would have been one of my last clients that seeded on the 4th of July. And once that crop started really taking off, the amount of sorghum, Italian ryegrass, it blew me away, the volume of it. And that's what we saw in most of our crops, the earlier stuff, a wide variation of plant species between the seeding dates, right?
So Chance, on the later stuff, like in July, what were you noticing as far as I guess the legumes, and what were the cool season plants doing on the later seeded stuff? Were they choked out by the sorghum, or kind of what were you? The thing about sorghum is it's nice to look at from the side, but you don't get much of a perspective as far as what's there for diversity, right? So like what were you seeing in that canopy?
We still saw a lot of diversity in the canopy. Obviously the canopy level was higher with the sorghum growing so tall, but underneath that we still saw a lot of diversity, a lot of peas, and the vetch were growing underneath. Good amount of cereals, and I think that the cereals even grew a little taller to try and compete with that sorghum for some sunlight too. So yeah. And then as far as yields went, there, I had some earlier seeded guys that were close to 11 ton an acre, and some of the later seeded stuff that would have came in. There wasn't a lot of yield variation, I find, between the early and later seeded.
So, Chance, we're going to come back to this at the end, but you bring up an interesting point. We talk about C4 grasses higher in energy and generally warm season blends lower in protein. Were you seeing something similar in your area as well, as far as the feed tests you've seen?
The feed tests I've seen have all been fairly consistent. We've been seeing typically around that 11 or 11 and a half on the high end for protein. A lot of those were let stand a little longer too, so the protein would have dropped down some, but pretty consistent as far as protein levels all the way throughout. And I think that the balance of different plant types really keeps that protein level at a consistent level, right? Energy levels have all been between. I was over at a fellow's place yesterday and he showed me his feed test. He got 7/10 of rain on it in the swath and the TDN was still 59. Protein was just shy of 11. So it maintained its condition quite well too.
Cool. So, Chance, you want to talk about just what's going on in this field? That is my most favorite plant in the world. That is hairy vetch. But what was the seeding date on it? And I think what I told you we wanted to talk about here is how did they decide when to cut this? What was the kind of or I'm not sure if this was yours or not, but yeah, kind of talk about harvest, I guess seeding date first and then harvest timing, kind of what the goal was.
Yeah, so the seeding date was around the 6th of June. And as far as that went, I think they were just targeting, it was some lighter land and they were just targeting good moisture for their seeding date. We had got some good rain previous and they wanted to capitalize on that. As far as harvest date, I believe this piece was fenced and they wanted to cut it a little bit earlier so they would have a chance at some regrowth and some late season grazing for the cattle. So they kind of picked a stage that worked for them. Some of the cereals were starting to turn, like the barley, you can see maybe a little bit in the picture was starting to yellow a little bit. And the vetch was very prominent, of course, right up to the top of the canopy. And they just felt that that was a good time to cut and maybe target some regrowth for grazing.
That is one of the better vetch stands I've ever seen. And I use it a lot. So, Chance, this was actually a video that I took when we were out at your place this summer. I forget his name. Damn it. I'm terrible with names.
Devin, yeah.
Devin, because he seeded this crop into July anyway.
This was a side-by-side full season and warm season seeded the 4th of July.
So he said to me, he said, I sowed it pretty late. He said, do you think this is going to amount to anything? And I said, this is a rain away from being just a massive crop. So I think and other thing I want to say, so yes, this is what we're looking at right here, but you'll see in these coming up pictures is the full season and the warm season I panned by, but just how there's probably double the amount of warm season plants in the warm season versus the full season, but still sown at this time of year, just how similar they can look, because the plants that are most designed for that growing season are going to become more prominent in the canopy, of course. So, Chance, why don't you kind of talk about your stick picks here and kind of what you were seeing, and just I'll flip through them, but just talk about kind of what you were seeing as far as growth and what was growing in the canopy.
Yeah, so I went down once a week and I would go out and take some pictures and document the height. And what I found when this crop took off, it was growing some weeks up to a foot a week. It was absolutely crazy how fast it was growing. And the full season and the warm season were neck and neck until probably the final week before cutting. The warm season just kind of was a few inches taller in that final week. but you could really see the variation in the canopy and all those different species, where they were living in their place in the canopy. You had biomass right from almost ground level to 6 feet in the air, and it was dense all the way throughout.
So as the designer of both of those blends, there is about twice as much, actually a little more than twice as much sorghum Sudan in the warm season, which is on the left side of that picture, versus the full. Did you notice any difference in diversity throughout? Because like that sorghum, it can really turn into a forest and choke out the sunlight. Did you notice any difference between the full season and the warm season as far as, say, legumes or even cereals, like cool season cereals, kind of like down lower in the canopy?
Well, I mean, obviously you could tell right away at the line when you crossed over the species that were missing in the warm season versus the full season. And you could tell that there was maybe a little less of them in the blend, but as far as variation in the canopy was full throughout in both of those blends.
What day did he harvest this, Chance?
The 9th of September, I believe he cut it.
So it was about 2 months roughly from seeding to harvest.
Yeah.
And
well,
cool.
In all honesty, if we weren't worried about a frost, he probably could have let it stand another week.
Well, that full season video I showed, it was Owen's, and everywhere I go, because it's so obvious when you're watching it, something takes 4 pictures a day. You can just sit there back and watch it grow, but it's a little different when you check it every 3 days. But I always tease Owen, that crop was healthily getting bigger every single day, and he cut it, and I said, what kind of idiot would cut that? So but it's something we should do more of, is like time-lapse cameras to like see if we can maximize like both like feed quality and total biomass, because like it's really tough to see when you only pass by it every few days. But getting like 4 pictures a day, it's really cool to watch that happen, kind of in short snippets throughout the day.
And this crop, just to add on, this crop averaged over 6 bales an acre.
Oh wow, dry.
No, he did silage bales. He did them a little bigger. They were closer to 60 inch, and hardcore bales, but
nice.
It yielded very well.
Well, I don't want any spoilers, because I got some questions about putting up dry hay, putting up silage at the end. Great job, Chance. Awesome. If you want to stick around for questions, that'd be much appreciated. I see we already have 5. I assume they're all about speckled parks and not about cover crops. So just hang around. Great job. Curtis, if you want to unmute yourself and turn your video on. So Curtis Lappage from Fisher Branch. Again, many thanks for coming on, Curtis. Please tell us a little bit about your farm, how you got there. And I gotta tell my dad joke. Curtis and I both got married this summer. I say, Curtis, when people ask me the best thing about being married, I say the best thing about married by far is I haven't planned a wedding in 6 months. And my wife, if you're watching, honey, I know you love that joke. So tell us about your farm, Curtis. I'll if you want to skip, just tell me to skip, and I'll try and keep up with you.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm Curtis, farm in Fisher Branch, Manitoba, with my grandparents. We calve out 600 head, Simmental and Charlet cross cow. We background all our calves throughout the winter. About 500 acres of green feed every year. We went through a little bit of drought the last few years, and upped it to about 700 for a couple of years, but yeah.
Are you doing any grain farming, Curtis, or straight cattle?
No, straight cattle.
Is that like, give us paint a picture of what your area looks like? It's where I'm going to move when I get retirement. People leave me alone, but there's a lot of bush.
Oh yeah, a lot of bush, pretty flat, but I mean, not too many full 160 acre quarter sections. But then I also got registered Simmental herd with my aunt and a registered Shar herd that I started. We raise our own bulls for the farm.
And same as Chance. If you got any interest, drop your interest in the Q&A. We'll hook you guys up.
Right on.
So tell us about kind of your cover crop journey, Curtis, how you heard about cover crops, kind of when you implemented them, and yeah, seeing a fit on the farm or uses in the future.
Yeah, so we went through like 4 years of drought before this year, and in 2019 I had a corn silage crop that failed, and like the hay crops weren't good. It just wasn't looking good, and kind of felt a need that we had to do something different or look at different options and quit beating our head against the wall. So yeah, in 2021, after looking into things, I came across the full season blend. Grew 120 acres of it last year, and like we were dry, way drier than normal. It was plagued with grasshoppers, and then we got rain in August and it kind of took off again. And then this year
So Curtis, let me stop you. Like,
yep.
In the drought, because there's a lot of people watching that had the same exact experience as you. I am one of them. Like, what were you seeing for species? What did you see come back? What kind of observations did you have?
Yeah, so like in the beginning, everything kind of came up pretty good, but the cereals kind of took off before everything. But then the grasshoppers really knocked them back. They didn't really touch the legumes or the sorghum, the sunflowers very much. But then once we got that rain, I don't know if the cereals stayed vegetative just because the grasshoppers, but yeah, the cereals came back, the sorghum took off, and the legumes, there was lots of peas and hairy vetch still. And considering the year, I was very happy with how it turned out. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about 2022 here.
The nightmare
you're not that dry anymore.
No, but honestly, I'd take the wet again over the drought. This was a little excessive, but yeah, we so in the spring we got those 3 Colorado lows, like one a week, and they're coming 3 days at a time. We were getting like 70 calves in those 3 days. It was nuts. So
that was horrible.
I mean, with that and all the rain and everything, it pushed our seeding date way back.
So when did you, well, I guess this was seeded July 17th, but why don't you talk about kind of when you finally did get on the field, when you started seeding, and like, I guess when you finally finished or quit sowing potholes.
Yeah, so I think it was like the 10th of June or something. We pulled the plug on putting our corn silage in, and finally at the 17th of July I put this in. This was the first of the full season that I put in.
Your first seed in the ground was the 17th of July.
Yes, sir. It was wild. Yeah, but I figured, like, I didn't expect much out of it, but we had to try something. So
yeah,
I sprayed it probably, well, we hired someone to do it, but got it sprayed 5 days earlier than when I started to put the seed in the ground.
Curtis, at this point, like, how many acres are you going around? Like, how many acres did you end up getting, say, out of 100?
Well, it's a 90-acre piece, and there was still 10 acres that I couldn't seed.
So did you get something in the ground everywhere, basically, at the end?
We got about half of we got 220 acres in this year.
And just moisture, like the rest of it just stayed wet all year.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And we had stuff that we just like we figured we couldn't get to it. The last stuff that I seeded was the 25th of July, I think. So after that, we were kind of just like, there's no point in putting anything in the ground.
But hang on. Oh shit. There. Something did happen. That's crazy.
Yeah. So this was that first field that I seeded, and I was super impressed with how it turned out.
So what were you seeing? Like, I think it's super interesting because I mean, no two full season crops are the exact same, but yours was the wildest mix I have ever seen pictures of. Because I think it was so wet. Like you had the cool season there, but it was far enough along in the year where the warm seasons were there as well. So just talk about kind of what you saw, what came up first. Was there something come later, or just whatever observation you had throughout the growing season?
Yeah, so everything kind of came up all at the same time. I guess like different height variations throughout the growing season once they figured out that symbiosis. But yeah, the cereals, legumes, the warm season plants, that it all just thrived together. And like, I don't know if it helped the cool season plants a little bit once like we were getting into August already and you're not getting as much sunlight. So whether that keeps them going a little bit. The only thing that I didn't see a lot of, like I didn't see a lot of hairy vetch, but there was some. The forage peas definitely were dominant for the legumes.
So you got a nice picture here of the sorghum. So I think, oh yeah, we got a picture here. So the picture on the left was the 15th of September. The one on the right was, I'm just blocking here, what was it, the 25th or 27th?
27th.
Yeah, so I'm assuming, I mean, I know what happened here. It was a frost, but like, what were you seeing before and after the frost? And yeah, I think you had a feed test on this as well. Just kind of talk about what harvest was like, what you did with it, and I guess feed quality as well.
Yeah, so like we had a couple frosts, just kind of lighter frost, and then we finally had a killing frost. But the only thing that really got touched was the sorghum. Like it started kind of wilting and whatever, but the biomass underneath it stayed green as can be, like as if it didn't get touched at all. But it got to the point we wanted to take it off before we got into too many hard frosts and found out the hard way. But
yeah.
So
what like what did you end up doing with it? I assume it was silage when it was that late in the year.
Yeah, we took it as silage. So I cut it and basically left it a day and then chopped it with the silage wagon. But it was it was 75% moisture, I think. So it was a little wet.
Yeah.
But it did keep really well. It was 21% protein and 59% TDN. And then compared to last year, we had, I think it was 13% protein and it was 65% TDN. But
yeah,
last year it grew from the 5th of June is when I seeded it and didn't take it off till beginning of September.
So you got an interesting turnip story. That picture on the left has got to be the coolest thing I've ever seen. So talk about the turnips in there. I guess like where were they getting their sunlight from, and like what is going on with that carnage there?
Yeah, I don't know if it's that the leaf on top got going right away and it just sucked in all that sunlight, but yeah, they loved life, and really everywhere that the blend got seeded, they looked like that. But when we cut it with the mowers, it would take that top vegetative part off, and then it would actually kick the bottom part out. And afterwards, when we turned the cows out on it, they actually went back and they were cleaning up what got left on the ground.
So yeah. we got a video of what's going on here. Can you see that okay, Curtis?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a great video, but yeah, talk about what's going on. Did you get much for grazing days? Sorry, I'll hit that again. Yeah, what'd you get for grazing days? And I guess was it just turnips they were eating?
Yeah, like we didn't have a lot of regrowth because we took it off and then turned them out on it right away. But they grazed on whatever ryegrass was coming up underneath the canopy, and then whatever stubble was there, and they got onto the turnips really well. Like they were digging them out of the ground, they were eating whatever was left on the ground. It was quite amazing, actually. I didn't expect that.
No, it's kind of cool to see the first time, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was the same. We had some low spots that we took off, cut them early because there were salinity spots, but for whatever reason, turnips and sugar beets seem to thrive in those areas, and they turn into bulbs. Not like yours. I've never seen anything like that before in my life. But they went through and they picked the turnips out pretty much first. If there was any leaf on there at all, that's what they were grabbing.
Yeah, and like as much as the cows liked them, my dad went out and picked a couple, and he definitely was picking one a week and eating them for supper.
I am not a turnip guy, so your dad can have them.
Yeah, I'm the same way. But as far as grazing days, we turned them out on the stubble for 2.5 weeks. There was 60 cow-calf pairs, and just on the stubble. After that, we opened up a pasture that was right next to them, and like you could have went out there and cut it and got a bale and a half of hay easy to the acre. And they would go to it a little bit, but then they would choose to go back to the stubble and like
try and find turnips.
Oh yeah.
Well, I always argue, my mom's a beef nutritionist, and I always argue with her. I'm like, the cow's going to choose what's best for the cow. There's nothing I can do. I can't force her to eat what the feed test says.
Yeah, and I've heard you say that many times, and I definitely experienced it this year. Yeah.
Mom, if you're watching. No, she's not. Cool, Curtis. Well, great job, man. Stick around for questions. It's actually, I think we're going to be a little quicker than we thought, because our third panelist, Brodie, I was saying off the start, he got a call about a generator at work, and it doesn't look like he's gonna make it. So I'm just gonna run through. Brodie and I had a conversation this afternoon, just kind of what he wanted to talk about. And anyway, so I'll just run through Brodie's quick. We got lots of questions already. I got lots of questions. So geez, it looks like we might get out of here before 10 o'clock, which would be a record for our webinar. So I don't want to talk about Brodie's farm without Brodie here, but I can tell you Brodie's story. He's been growing cover crops for a few different years. Same story as myself, Curtis and Chance, just young producers that are passionate about the cattle industry, and we want to find a better way, a less risk way to produce feeds, take better advantage of the resources that are free to us, and actually start benefiting our most precious resource, which is our soil. So this was a field Brodie took. This was actually salinity area. He just wanted to, this is on his place. Just wanted to show the difference in growth. These pictures are 1 week apart. And this was kind of an earlier seeded crop. So kind of a theme from Brodie's pictures is in Alberta, they were able to get on the land earlier. And a lot of these crops went in earlier, seeing a lot more cool season plants. So this is Brodie's field. Then this is what it actually turned into. So this was a farm near a neighbor of Brodie's. It was sown on the 23rd of May. So something about the conditions at Rimbey, excuse me, they had about, I think it was 13 inches of rain or 17 inches of rain in the month of July. And then they basically ran out. There was almost nothing after that. So kind of to be expected. So we see a lot of cool season plants. You can see the purple of the forage pea, the oats, the barley. I can see a purple vetch plant coming up there. But yeah, so this is the farm's crop, and this is what it looked like when they were harvesting it. The farmer was nice enough to send Brodie this picture. So like I said, they sowed it early and took it early for silage, as you can see. And then in July, they basically had no precipitation at all or very little. And this is kind of what they were seeing as far as regrowth. So here's Brodie standing out in the field on one of his field days. On the right is the same field at harvest. So even at, this is a very similar photo to Chance's. You can see the hairy vetch is quite prominent in there, where it's not prominent where Brodie is now. You can see the hairy vetch when we get good moisture. Even this crop was sown kind of the 1st of June, end of May. You can see it dominates a significant part of the canopy. So I know that was a quick summation of kind of Brodie's presentation. We're hoping he can hop back in the question period. If there's anyone from Alberta that's got questions for him. But I'm just going to touch on really quickly about kind of what we learned from a Covers & Co standpoint. And I am the one with some help from some of my coworkers and some of my friends and customers come up with the blends, adjust the blends kind of based on what we see. So this section, we're just going to touch on really quick on what did we learn this year, because plant diversity is an ever-changing ball game. Mother Nature will humble you every single chance she gets. So we're never going to know it all. The best we can do is observe as best we can and put the plant species and the practices in place so we have the best chance for success. So number one thing that we learned is seeding date and soil conditions. So making sure the soil is warm enough for all of the species in the blend, so each of them have a chance to germinate, get out of the ground, capture sunlight evenly, so we get a diverse canopy of plants that are going to capture sunlight and stimulate soil biology. And I added in there soil conditions because still there is a thought out there that is incorrect that cover crops are somehow magic beans that can be spread on or sown 3 inches deep or harrowed in. Even germination and good seed to soil contact are actually the key with plant diversity. If we can get plants out of the ground even an inch, but good, diverse, every plant germinated, we're probably 70 or 80% the way there to having a good quality, diverse biomass come fall. And that just comes with good seed to soil contact, even emergence. If you wouldn't sow canola or corn into it, I definitely wouldn't sow a full season cover crop into it. Seeding time and seeding conditions have to be stressed as important, and it's our best chance of success for later in the year to harvest high quality, high yielding plant biomass. The right blend in the right context. So with the full season cover crop, we've seen, yes, even under early conditions or late conditions, there are the plant species in place to thrive under those conditions. But kind of what we say is, if we're going to get out there extremely early, we might as well go with a cool season blend and save the warm season, because likely we're not going to get our bang for our buck or the potential from the warm season. If we're going to sow mid-May to end May, early June, I mean, a full season cover crop, maximizing plant diversity, having warm enough soil to have even germination and capture sunlight to really take advantage of the biological stimulation that comes with it. And then later in the year, whereas we saw with Chance's photos, that line in the field with the warm season and the full season sown in July, well, probably what we could do in that situation is focus more on the warm season plants, whereas the cool season plants are going to struggle in those kind of hot and lack of rain environments. And the last one, as always, 96% of a plant, right? 96% of a plant is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. If we get adequate rainfall or even adequate to above average rainfall, plant diversity is just going to trump monocrops every single time. So where we get precipitation or good precipitation, we just see really excellent results with plant diversity. And I would say, even if we are in areas of lower precipitation, putting the right plants and the right plant blends together to maximize our water use efficiency to grow high quality, high yielding biomass. So that is the presentation. I see we got a lot of questions here. I got my technical guy who's coming by. We're going to get to questions. So Curtis and Chance, if you guys want to take your if you want to turn your videos on and turn your mics on, we'll get to the question period. So we got quite a few to get to. Hopefully Brodie can join us. later in the questions. Okay, so I'm going to start with a question of my own, guys. So first one is, in your area with full season cover crops, what is the most common harvest practice, whether that's silage, dry hay, or grazing? And kind of based on your guys' experiences, what did you see for dry down time? Curtis, you were talking about your silage was 74% moisture. So what did you, would you have left it longer? So maybe we'll start with you, Curtis, and then Chance, but just talk about kind of common harvest practices and kind of what you guys see.
Yeah, so most of it's taken off for silage. Last year I dabbled with a little bit of dry hay with it. But typically for us anyway, we get so late in the season by the time we get to it that we got to leave it for so long it doesn't dry down as well. So it's harder to get it dry. Last year though, the moisture, we left it for I think 3 days, 4 days maybe, and it dried down to I think it's 58% moisture. But yeah, this year it stayed wet just because I think the crop didn't ever have a chance to mature. Yeah, but most people silage it and try to graze it after.
Cool. How about you, Chance?
Yeah, for us this year, I mean, we had a pretty, it was ideal, I guess, for making dry feed this year. We had a really dry tail end of July and August, hot and dry. So a lot of guys were able to put it up dry. Took, between 5 and 7 days typically for dry down time, even with turning it. And then myself and quite a few of my other customers have done silage bales or chopped silage. And I think typically it was about that. On the third day, you could be either baling it or starting to chop it. I could see where it maybe on a different year would take a little longer, but we had really excellent haying and cutting weather this year. So,
well, and I'll speak from my experience just with, I guess, running a business with cover crops for the last 4 years. There was more put up dry hay this year than I ever would have guessed or ever would have thought. I bet there was probably 60% put up dry hay. I think that's a bit of a testament to it got warm in the summer and everyone's pretty familiar. We need some dry down time. But I'll speak for our farm. Like, we bale graze in the winter, so we try and get as much up in dry form as we can, just for that flexibility in wintertime to actually, set out a couple weeks worth of bales. And not that I don't love my cows. I walk out there and I see them every few days just because I miss them. But just give you the flexibility with being on the road or whatever life happened. So yeah, there was exciting, but I don't know if we'll ever get another year like this where we get that 2-week window to actually put up dry hay. Curtis, when was your wedding?
September 24th.
Mine was August 13th, and my wife said I could pick any date. I just had to stick with it. But after the late seeding, oh man, August was busy.
Oh yeah.
and I really had to act like the most important thing was the wedding and not 1,000 bales of dry hay to be put up. I got a whisper in my ear saying, and Owen's right, he's put up a lot of full season dry, is laying it wide seems to make all the difference in the world. So we do the same thing. We try and lay it absolutely as wide as we can, and we'll actually run over the middle of the swath. And then if you can get like 6 days a week and flip it, it seems to make all the difference in the world. Of course, this is in a world where it doesn't rain. And Curtis, you probably couldn't have done this.
No, we got to like 25 inches of rain in sometime in July, and I quit counting. It was too depressing.
You couldn't have just had 2 of those the previous year, eh?
Oh yeah.
So guys, we're going to talk about something. There's a few questions in the chat kind of about soil improvements. Now, I know this isn't necessarily your wheelhouse, and I can help you guys out or follow up with what you got. But just kind of wondering, maybe Chance, we'll start with you. Curtis, it's probably a better question with the sheer amount of precipitation you had. But I guess, Chance, we'll start with you. Just talk about what you saw as far as improvements or sticking a shovel in the ground, or I don't know if I don't really want to talk about soil tests, but I guess we can. Just kind of what you saw as far as an observation with improvements to the land.
Well, for us, it was hard to tell as far as water infiltration this year. I mean, I couldn't really give you an example on myself, but I was talking to a fella, he's from east of Tisdale the other day, and they were swamped in the spring as well. And so they grew full season, and beside it in the same field, they had an oat crop. And in July, they got 2.5 inches of rain. And he said, in that oat crop, in the same field, there was standing water all over the field. In the full season cover crop, you could walk through it and not get your feet wet. So it just tells me that that's really almost immediately helping that water infiltration into your soil, right?
Just to touch on that point, Curtis, I'll let you go because you need to infiltrate water more than anyone. Yeah, Chance, we see that all the time, man. At least in Manitoba, 1 inch of water infiltrates in 1 hour. And that is from the Manitoba government, but we have done that test hundreds of times, and it's pretty standard. 2 inches of rain takes a day or whatever, 16 hours to 24 hours. Where we see high plant diversity, we can improve that 10x. And we just see that all the time. We see water infiltration rates definitely below 10 minutes, lots of times 3, 4, 5 minutes. So I've experienced it in the real world a lot. And then, I mean, I don't know anyone on planet Earth that's a water infiltrator more than I. So yeah, it's nice to hear a real world example of some of the testing that we've been doing, because I know it'll work. I've done the test. It's nice to see it in practical, right?
Yeah.
So Curtis, how about you? What have you seen as far as soil improvements on your farm?
So I didn't take any actual measurements of the water infiltration, but just from what you could see, like in that one video where the calf was digging the turnip out of the ground, we had a rain a couple days before that, and any other place that you wanted to drive out there, you would have had mud all over your tires and wouldn't think about driving out there. But I was driving out there with my pickup truck and it wasn't picking up anything. Then I had on my home piece here, I put in the sod blend, and there was probably still 20 acres that I couldn't get seeded, and where it wasn't seeded, there was still water sitting there at the end of the year, whereas where it had been seeded, there was no standing water laying in puddles, or like you could go out there after rain and it might be squishy or something, but like it wasn't sticking to your shoes. It was infiltrating.
There's a good video if anyone wants to go on our website on our farm research. We had 3.5 inches of rain after a full season cover crop, and I was walking out across the fields in my shoes, and there was no mud on my feet. It was devastating getting 3.5 inches in like 6 hours, but it was really neat to see like real world water infiltration happening in front of my very eyes. Sorry guys, the questions keep rolling in, so I'm going to keep asking them. What are you guys planning on growing on your cover crop land next year? And what do you plan on using as far as fertilizer? And I'm going to go last again here, just because I want to give fair warnings about doing trial strips and maybe not doing too much too soon. But Chance, why don't you start? What are you planning on growing on where you had cover crops this year?
I'm going to follow it up with oats, I think, and try and reduce my nitrogen input on that land as well. I think it's important to have it in a rotation, just like anything else. But I think that a cereal crop in my world is a good follow-up, and I can hopefully harvest that for feed as well, right?
Curtis?
So the stuff that we grew the full season on, we'll follow it up with corn silage. Partly just because we couldn't return the seed this past year, so we still have it kicking around. But I do want to try some trials, throwing in some hairy vetch on the pieces where we can actually seed it north and south. As far as fertilizer, I'm hoping that we can minimize it. I didn't get any soil test done this fall, but as far as what we grew this year, it definitely used some nitrogen, but I don't know how much of that leached away with all the rain that we got too. But every other mineral that showed up on the soil test actually increased.
So, okay, that's a perfect segue. Thank you, Curtis, because we got a couple questions about before and after soil tests. And I'm sorry for those of you that don't give a shit about chemistry. I have to talk about it. Because when I went grew my first full season cover crop a long time ago, I don't even know what that would be now, 7 years or 6 years. I grazed mine. I expected before soil test it showed nothing. And I grew a beautiful cover crop. We intensively grazed it twice. Left it for a year, soil tested in the exact same GPS location, and voila, nothing. And I thought, how can this be possible? I grew this massive crop, this diversity. I have been lied to. Why are there no nutrients there? But there is actually a pretty simple explanation, and it's something that we just see time and time again before a full season and after. A soil test actually measures soluble nutrients, so nutrients that are freely available for the plant to uptake. You know, what we're doing with cover crops or full season cover crops is we're getting biology to break down those minerals from the soil, put them in the plant. Of course, we harvest some above ground biomass, but now we have that root biomass where that plant is holding on to it to be broken down by biology for next year's crop. Well, that's never going to show up on a soil test. And to just give you an example, again, if you guys check out our website, we grew a full season cover crop, intensively grazed it twice, soil tested before and after. There were 4 or 5 parts per million nitrogen on that field, and we grew over 100 bushel to the acre oat crop. There's almost nothing for phosphorus, almost nothing for sulfur. So how does that happen? It's that the minerals were actually tied in the roots. Biology consumes those roots and above ground plant biomass. They break it down, and now that's available for next year's plant. That's a really tough thing for soil tests to measure. And soluble nutrients from Mother Nature's perspective is an inefficiency. A soluble nutrient can leach away, it can volatilize, it can oxidize. So Mother Nature's blueprint is to try and keep as few soluble nutrients as possible, tie those nutrients up in roots, have diverse soil biology, break down the roots, either die or crap them out, and that is what we know as plant available nutrients. So this is a really good question, and Chance, you touched on it a bit, but I'm going to pressure you a bit more because I agree with you wholeheartedly. Do you use full season in your crop rotation, or do you seed it on the same piece of land year after year? So Curtis, why don't you take a stab at this first, kind of what your plan is, and then Chance, and then I'll give you guys my 2 cents.
Yeah, so definitely think it benefits to have it in a rotation rather than growing it year after year. But at the same time, I think if you can graze it, like intensively graze it, I think you could potentially get away with growing a full season blend year after year, or even changing to a different blend in the next year, or even trying to blend your own mix of something together. I think it is possible, but I mean, the key to that, I think, is you got to have the animals on it.
Cool. Chance?
Yeah, I mean, exactly like what Curtis is saying. I think if you can get it grazed off and have those cattle spreading the manure on there as well. We're going to try a piece this year that we grew full season on, and we're going to try the warm season on it this year and see what happens. And it's a place where we fall graze and then winter the cattle. So it gets grazed right to the ground. But then also from a mixed farm standpoint, it's another tool in the toolbox to help combat input costs if you've got it in a rotation, and it also helps you manage that weed pressure if you've got it in a rotation where you can hit it with some different chemical applications to manage that, right? Because from our standpoint this year, I think most of the reduced yields that we saw were due to weed pressure in that first 3 weeks or month of that stand being established. So it's really key to be able to manage that, and sometimes you need that crop rotation to do that, right?
So I want to echo exactly what those guys said. What we are doing with plant diversity is stimulating soil biology. We're not stimulating soil biology as efficiently if we're going back in with the exact same species the year before. So I would say at the very least, change up your blends, go with something different. Like if it was mostly, wheat, barley, peas the year before, switching it up to different plant species, even if they overlap a bit, at least that's better if that's what you're going to do. But we have been harping on this, or I've changed our presentation to harp on this, where it's like, I think cover crops need to be used as a tool where we can implement a cover crop and we can actually build off the cover crop implementation by introducing new species. We can cash crop, reduce our inputs on because we had the cover crop there, and then use that in some form of rotation where we're still stimulating new and diverse biology, but using the cover crop in a strategic way to actually reduce costs on the higher risk fields. And the other thing is, it's kind of complex, and I don't talk about it a whole lot anymore. So apologies if this goes over some people's heads. But mycorrhizal fungi is just an amazing tool. It's a hyphal network that is in the soil that forms a symbiotic relationship with different plant species and shares minerals and nutrients between different plant species. Basically, after a full season cover crop, where we see our best results with plants are mycorrhizal dependent, not necessarily monocrops, but mycorrhizal dependent plants. So we're stimulating the biology and the fungi in the soil. And it seems like going back in with a mycorrhizal dependent plant after high intense plant diversity, it seems like we get way better results. So what are those? Corn's a good one. Oats is a good one. Flax is the most mycorrhizal dependent plant we can grow. Barley, wheat, they of course all are dependent on mycorrhizal fungi. Really, we just see better results with those plant species because we've already got the hyphae network there. So great answers, guys. I echo exactly what you said. Okay, so we talked about this before, so we're going to talk about regrowth, and I do want to talk about it. How much regrowth and how could you maximize regrowth for grazing? So maybe both you guys just talk about like when you harvested and how much precipitation you had after, and then I'll kind of touch on kind of what we've seen over the last 5 years or so. So Chance, why don't you take a stab at her first, and then Curtis, give her a go.
We harvested our full season at the tail end of August. I guess would have been about the 20th to 23rd of August, somewhere in there. Anyway, and we saw after harvest anywhere from a foot to 16 inches in places of regrowth basically across the board on the fields. I mean, obviously that's going to be subjective to rainfall and harvest dates. If you're targeting regrowth, you're going to want to have it seeded a little earlier and also have it harvested a little earlier so that you can give that an opportunity to regrow, right? But I would say we were pretty average as to harvest time, and we saw a very good amount of regrowth. And my cows were out on a 35-acre piece. I had 50 cows out there for 2.5 weeks, basically until they picked it clean before we started feeding.
Cool. Curtis, how about you?
Yeah, so just with the scenarios that we've been given the last 2 years, I haven't had a lot of experience with the regrowth. We get to it so late that it really doesn't have a chance to even come back much. But yeah, there's definitely the potential there. If you're taking it off a little bit earlier, that's going to be the key to getting the regrowth. And you can't see that when I didn't expect regrowth.
Yeah, probably the 17th of July is a little late. And from our experience, just to echo exactly what these guys said, basically it kind of depends on how much rainfall, but also how much sun. Again, I sound like a broken record, but it's 96%. And there's lots of years where we get wet falls and no sunlight at all, and still we're not going to get much plant biomass. I will say, if you're looking to maximize regrowth, grazing is absolutely the way to go. So where we intensively graze our full season cover crops, we get any good biomass cover on the surface. If we get any precipitation in the summer at all, the regrowth is substantial. And that's we use full season cover crops for winter forage, but also we use them for biological stimulation on our cash crop land. So if we're looking to maximize biological stimulation, hell yeah, we can graze that early, get good ground cover, feed those microbes, and focus on regrowth, capturing as much sunlight as possible throughout the year. So guys, I can't believe I forgot this one. Going to just touch on fertilizer quick. So Chance, I know there was lots of cover crops in your area. Had anybody tried fertilizer on a field or fertilizer trials? How did they yield, or how did they look as compared to not? And Curtis, you the same, if you've done any trials or had anyone that did a field or did a strip, and just how it turned out. So I guess Curtis, we'll switch it up. We'll start with Curtis and then we'll go with Chance.
Yeah, so both years I've tried a little bit with putting fertilizer down, and then just putting the inoculant down with the seed. Last year it was a very high rate of nitrogen, like it was side by side by our corn silage. So like it was getting 150 pounds of N. Partly because of the droughts, like it didn't germinate the greatest because it was getting late into June when I got it seeded. But I really didn't notice a difference in growth between what had fertilizer and what didn't. And this year again, I put out fertilizer on part of it, and there wasn't a difference. Other than I knew where it was, I could tell you like, hey, this side of the field had some fertilizer, this side didn't. But if you were looking at it, you wouldn't be able to tell.
Chance?
Yeah, I think we've kind of had the same findings. I put absolutely nothing down for fertilizer with I wanted to test it. So I put nothing down for fertilizer with my full season. And we averaged 5.3 large hardcore bales an acre off of that. So to me, it tells me that it's putting in the work. I had customers that gave it their full blend, that they would give their oats or canola, everything, and they had excellent yields, but I can't say that it would really be any different had they not put that down. As long as those legumes are doing the work on the nitrogen side, I think that's going to take off, right? And well, when you were out, Joe, this summer, we saw that when we dug up the vetch and the cowpeas and everything, nodules on those plants were amazing. Like looked like clusters of fish eggs on there, basically, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, we do these trials every year. We actually paid a third-party research firm to do trials with us this year. And here's the summation. Sometimes under some conditions, but soil's complex, biology's complex, the climate's complex, weather's complex, plants, crazy complex. Sometimes we do see beneficial results with some, but I would argue if you're putting on significant amounts of fertilizer right off the hop, it's not going to be financially viable because the cost of fertilizer is so damn high that you're not going to get your return back. Is there an argument in some cases for, 20, 30, 40 pounds of N and maybe a little P? Some cases, yes, absolutely. But in our experience and with the third-party trials that were done this year, we see early response from fertilizer. You can see a line in the field, it greens up better, it maybe fills in a little bit quicker, and by mid-July, that line's gone. You cannot see it. There is no discrepancy between crops. There may be a discrepancy between plant species. However, we generally don't see a large difference. Now, I'm not saying that in every case. I've had people come up to me and say, we've used fertilizer for the last couple of years. Seems to be working good. That's great. I would shy away from using too much nitrogen. The legumes will be the first thing to consume that in. It won't form a relationship with rhizobium bacteria to start capturing that atmospheric nitrogen. And then when the cereals are drawing from the nitrogen pool in the soil, they don't have the nodulation in the legumes to actually process that in and transfer it. So again, we're going to test it some more because we get asked about this a lot. It's great to hear your guys' perspective. Brodie, welcome. Thanks for coming. If you can hear me, turn your video on, turn your mic on. We were just talking about fertilizer and positive, negatives, in between effects of fertilizer on the cover crops that you've seen grown in your area. And yeah, just kind of what observation you've seen.
Hey, how's it going? Sorry
Super.
about that.
All good.
Pretty much this last year, the only thing that I seen that was a big issue is just seed depth. We didn't have anyone fertilize out here, so we had some guys that put it on some fields that they fed on, but that was about it.
What was the response like in those spots, Brodie? Like, was it noticeable?
You've seen guys that where they fed, yeah, there was better results than other spots, but I wouldn't say a crazy amount. Like one guy was probably half a bale to maybe a bale an acre, but I think that field was a better field too. So
Cool, guys. The questions keep rolling in, so if you guys got to go, just tell me, Brodie. If your generator goes, get out of here. So I'm just going
to be good now.
So we got a friend of mine, Darwin Gork, usually answers or asks very thoughtful questions. I'm not going to answer that because I've got a call with him. We're going to chat about this. Okay, sorry. You know what? We can work. Oh, sorry, guys. I'm trying to find. Sorry, there's a few to choose from here. I'm trying to see if I can group them together to ask two in one. Anyone have any experience with sowing cover crops on sod? And if so, I guess what was the blend? I mean, all of you guys are somewhat affiliated with Covers & Co, but has anyone tried sowing cover crops on sod and kind of what results you saw? So, Bro, we'll start with you. If you got any experience, we'll just go around the circle, Chance and Curtis, and I'll finish up, guys.
Yeah, the girlfriend's dad did 30 acres of it this year. They probably put it a little too deep. It looked to be about a little over an inch deep, and didn't get a good burn on it, but it seemed to The alfalfa was pretty aggressive. Even when they did spray it out, it seemed to just fertilize it at the end of the day. And then,
Yeah, that's my experience with glyphosate and alfalfa, bro.
yeah. And then, but after that, kind of the peas and the oats kind of worked in there pretty good. And the ryegrass. I didn't see much, maybe the odd sunflower, and then their turnips were there, but nothing crazy.
How about the sorghum?
Didn't see any sorghum.
No sorghum.
Nope.
Shit.
But
Well,
she was a pretty
you're gonna make me
cold,
look
wet
bad.
year.
You're gonna make me look bad when it comes back around to me. How about you, Chance?
We only actually we didn't sell very much of the sod this year. We didn't have a lot of demand for it yet, but one of the fellows that did plant it, he planted it in his pasture. Depleted old hay stand and wasn't producing much. And one of the remarks that he had about it was it would look like the cows would graze it right off to the ground, look like there's nothing left. And it just kept coming back. And he said the cows would keep going back to that spot, and continue to graze there. And they didn't want to leave it, basically. So obviously it was establishing and growing vigorously as fast as the cows could chew it off, basically, right? And it had established in a pretty tough environment in that hard packed sod root mat, right?
Cool. Curtis?
I tried about 60 acres of the sod blend this year. Seeded it right into the sod. Sprayed the hay out last fall. It was a hay stand that had been in hay for the last 20 years or so. And just being so wet, like it was the 23rd or the 25th of July that I got it in. And we got 2 inches of rain right after that. So actually one of those pictures in the slides was the field that had the sod seeded blend. So I mean, it had a rough start. It didn't amount to a whole lot, but that's where I could see that the water was actually infiltrating. Like there wasn't puddles sitting around in the fall. As far as putting the full season into sod, I guess the first round that I seeded to the sod blend, I still had a little bit of the full season in the tank. So I just, the first round, that's what it was. But it's a lot of, there was a lot of stuff that didn't come up in that first round. Just seed to soil contact, right? Like, but I want to try the sod blend again and actually give it a half decent chance.
Well, honestly, Curtis, the sod blend was born out of guys sowing the full season just into sod and us just noticing what actually could grow in those conditions and what wasn't coming. So we did a few years of testing, but it seems like sorghum thrives in those conditions.
Yeah.
But to be perfectly honest with people, I would say we just had the fertilizer conversation where, you know, it's a toss-up. Is it more profitable to use it? Is it not? Because we talk about balancing carbon and nitrogen, there's so much stored carbon in the root biomass of sods, and no two sods different. You know, some of it's 20 years old and was overgrazed. Some of it, you know, has alfalfa. There's soil actually there. So what we found is if it's an older hay stand that actually has so much carbon tied up in that root biomass, that we do actually see positive responses from some nitrogen application. Now that's not to say that's every time. We've seen lots work fine without, but again, every sod's different and no soil test is going to tell you this answer. So it's more about using your mind, using your eyes, seeing what's out there, and honestly, like trialing this stuff. I mean, it drives me crazy that farms go use expensive inputs and they use it on 100% of the field. So you never know if it actually had any positive impact on your operation or not. So guys, we're getting down to the nitty gritty here. I'm gonna ask you 2 questions in one here. So we got a question about any animal comparisons between silage, cover crop, hay, corn silage. Yes, we have done that, Brian. And there were some positive results. We need to replicate them, but a really good opportunity to talk about feeding full season cover crops. And maybe while you guys are talking about your operation and feeding, tell us what kind of seeding tool you have for sowing cover crops, because we have stressed even emergence and even germination. So maybe Curtis, just start with your seeding tool and then talk about kind of your feeding program, how you're using the cover crops, and then we'll go Chance and Brodie.
So we have a sunflower no-till drill that we use to seed. Had really good luck with it. It has individual metering. It works really well. What was the second part of the?
So
Sorry.
actually, what are you feeding your cover
Feeding,
crop
yeah,
to?
right. Yeah, so this year, the calves that we're backgrounding, they're getting, it's about half of the ration is the full season silage, and then they're getting some oat silage and a second cut alfalfa bale, and they aren't getting any grain. As far as actual weights, we have yet to weigh them to put them into loads and sell them yet. But they're gaining well, keeping condition. The cows, the bred cows, are actually getting the full season silage in their silage mix too. So we feed everything out on pasture, and they're getting a lot of low quality hay right now. Just their needs aren't as high, so it works really well to balance that low quality feed out.
Cool. Chance?
Yeah, we're using a set of John Deere 9350 hoe drills, nothing special, 7-inch space. And kind of what we've seen is, we've had guys that have used a one-way drill, and we've had guys that use the latest and greatest seeding technology, and it's just a matter of getting that good seed depth and proper seed to soil contact. It doesn't seem to matter what kind of seeding tool that you're using. I mean, obviously some are better than others, but it seems to work anyway. As far as the feeding, the big thing that I've noticed with the full season blend are silage bales. We did silage and dry bales this year. We're feeding our replacement heifers, are getting dry bales and some haylage and a few pounds of oats a day. They're holding excellent condition, putting on, they're gaining nicely, and the cows are getting the silage bales of the full season. And what I really like about them compared to a traditional monocrop silage is there always seems to be that you got to find that balance when you're cutting that to either target protein or target energy with a regular silage crop. And this full season I find is very balanced. We touched on that before. We've got very nice protein levels that are good for calves and bred cows. We're sitting around 11.5% on our feed, or 11.5 on our feed tests, and anywhere from 60 to just shy of 68 on TDN. And also find that a lot less waste. We're feeding it in bale feeders out on pasture, and those cows will clean that right to the ground consistently, right? So I've got no complaints as far as feed quality and uptake on it.
Cool. Brodie?
We had a custom guy come in and seed ours, and the one thing I didn't like about his was his 12-inch spacing he had on his John Deere.
Well, I'm glad you
seems to
touched on it,
be-
because that was one of the questions. Is 12-inch too far? So maybe touch on it, just kind of what you saw and what you didn't like.
So yeah, too bad I couldn't have been here for the presentation there, but if you look at the pictures there, we had a clean start. But with being 12 inches, it takes so long for that canopy to close in that you got sunlight to the ground. And then in that year too, we had plus 35. and that just seemed to let the weeds take right off in between. And we fought them for a bit there, but then it seemed like, well, a month later, all of a sudden they just disappeared and the cover crop was ahead. So for competition wise, it handles that pretty well. But for 12-inch, I'd say max I'd like to see is a 10-inch.
Can I just ask you a quick question, Brodie? Was that a single row or was that a paired row on the 12-inch space?
Single.
Single, yeah. So a 12-inch with a spread tip or a paired row would probably be a better option then.
That's literally exactly what who was asking that. Whoop. Oh damn! Now I gotta say the name
I
in front
saw
of
it
everyone.
in the questions here. That
Try.
would bring you down closer to a 10-inch space at least.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're gonna spread 9-inch, right? 'Cause
Yeah,
you're gonna spread it
exactly.
3 inches.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Oh, I guess I'll go. So we have 2 drills. Both are junk. No, one's okay. We got a 750 John Deere disc drill, which I love. It's a wonderful tool. And we got an 8800 Borgo hoe shank, which is just a standard drill. I think every single cattle farmer has owned one that is putting in feed or going to own one. If you want to own one, call me. Anyway, we just saw, even with 3/4 inch openers with the Borgo, it's just, I mean, we did see kind of similar to what Brode, like we were going 10 inches wide just because we had mid-row banders. And there was enough disturbance there where we were seeing, some millet pressure, or, even you get red root pigweed if you get later in the year. But really, the disc drill is a wonderful tool. Just having virtually no disturbance, a good clean start. We can achieve 100% of the time, even feeding depth and even emergence, because we've got that rolling disc that's putting it in the even level the whole time. So I'm not a John Deere salesman, but it's a damn fine tool, and it has improved our farm. So I know, but nothing wrong with an 8800 Borgo. Of course, we did it for literally years and years, a decade, and it worked great. But just to be 100% honest, we had really good luck with the disc drill this year as well. Oh, and as far as feeding, we had a fantastic full season cover crop this year. Cows are literally eating it today. We do 3-week bale grazing paddocks, and people ask me all the time, how do you afford all the waste? But you get up in good condition, and there just is hardly any plant waste at all. They will lick it up right down to the snow, and then we just give them poorer quality feed to kind of supplement them, to let us know when they're actually done grazing those bales. So as long as you got a higher quality feed with a lower quality feed as kind of a barometer, it works really good, and they do an excellent job cleaning it up. So guys, I'm going to get to the last question, but I got to give away the jacket and the hat. We are going to go. There are a lot of questions here. Full season cover. Okay, Stephanie, I didn't get to answer your question. Will the full season cover winter kill? Put your address in the Q&A. You get the jacket. Sorry for not getting to your question. That was supposed to be for the best question. Now we're just giving it to the ones we didn't get to. So we're adapting season 3. John Turner, we also didn't get to your question about fungal to bacteria ratios. And to be perfectly honest, I haven't done a fungal to bacteria ratio test in a few years. But reach out to us, shoot us an email. We got lots and lots of soil tests, maps, you name it. So please, John, put your name in. We'll send you a hat. And the last question, you guys, is, sorry, your final thoughts. So I guess maybe we'll start with Brode, Chance, and then Curtis. Just, you guys are all within, like, fresh at cover crop, so you've grown it a few years. Just kind of your number one takeaways, kind of where you see uses in the future, what you'd like to try as far as whether it's grazing or dry hay or silage or a different practice or sowing later or earlier, just based in your area, your soil type, your farm. What are your observations been about cover crops, and kind of where do you see them fitting in your operation in the future?
Without here, kind of as soon as you can get in the ground and get seeding, I would say it'd be the best. Me and Owen kind of discussed on it this summer, is just seeing that guys that got in sooner and beat the rain and kind of had something established before we got the monsoon hitting. It seemed to do a little bit better, could handle the whatever we had, 12 inches to 18 inches, depending where you're at in June. And the only thing that I seen that was a big issue was just seed depth. Guys getting down well over an inch that's where the failures were.
And where do you see cover crops playing a role in your farm in the future, bro?
I wouldn't mind trying to do like a mock graze or something, just kind of be a good way to build the soil back up and put it all back out there without feeding it to a cow and then hauling it back out in a spreader. So
I think everyone should try that. When you first think of it, you think what a pain in the ass it's going to be moving cows every day or every other day. And then you just find yourself looking forward to it every day. it's kind of neat. You get to spend some time with the cows and time with the cover crop. I don't need much more.
And this last year would have paid off pretty good with the pounds that you guys are putting on this. So
hell yeah. Yeah, we had a couple guys here in Manitoba that did pretty well buying calves and backgrounding them on cover crops. It was a really good cover crop year and a good year in the cattle industry as well. So for sure, something to think of. Chance, how about you?
Overall, we're quite happy with them. I think we're going to try and expand generally the usage of them in our operation. I ideally want to get a rotation going and implement that in a full scale rotation. One of the other things that I'm interested in trying this year is in some of our pasture land, some of the more tired areas of it, I would like to go in and drill, a full season or a sod blend direct into that and help improve our stocking rates on that pasture as well, because we're limited in our access to land and we need to utilize that to the best efficiency. And I think that's a good way to try and up that efficiency of that land, right?
100%. Great answer. Curtis?
I'd like to get into grazing it more and manipulating the seeding dates a little bit to your benefit. So like if you wanted to seed some of it a little bit later, but let it grow completely in a pasture that you have paddocked off so that you get some later season grazing. That's one of my biggest goals, is just to get some extended grazing. We had a group of 200 cows this year that we got to 200 days grazing, and like they weren't being supplemented with feed. And once we did start supplementing them, we were giving them half of their diet. So I mean, that's big feed saving cost if you're having to buy feed. That, and like, to lower your input costs is another huge thing. Like, it's, if you can lower those costs, it opens up so many other doors to maybe invest in some more fencing, or just maybe have a chance of getting ahead a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of where I see cover crops going with me.
And if anyone listens to this webinar, I'm going to continue my journey trying to use my plant diversity and my livestock to lower input costs on my grain side. I think, well, especially with grain prices the way they are, it's just like low risk, high return potential. And I think every single year that we're doing it, the system's getting a little bit better. I'm still a relatively young man, other than I'm a little hard on myself. I want to reap the benefits in like 10 years, 15 years of no synthetic inputs, on my farm at all, and still running a profitable cattle herd at minimum risk, minimum inputs, and having a highly profitable grain operation as well. Same thing, minimal inputs, which means minimal risk and hopefully higher return. Not going to get there overnight. I would have said when I started my journey 10 or 15 years ago, I might have been there now, but Mother Nature's a humbling bitch, and I love her so much. But she's hard some years, and she's forgiving others. And it's like, it's been a wild journey, but it's like, I'm not turning back now. I've done too many webinars. So anyway, you guys, you did a fantastic job. Thanks for everyone that was on. The next one's not for 2 weeks. We're talking about swath grazing. If you guys could hear clapping, I would have everyone clap for you, but you guys did an amazing job. And thank you so much for being on. And have a good night, you guys.
You too. See ya.
Yeah,
See
You as
ya.
well. Thank you.
thanks.